the aftermath now of what's going on over in Eden Zero with like the stuff with Witch and Witch's death, and how exactly this is all gonna just pan out, how characters are going to follow up from this is gonna, obviously play out a lot of strong events, but now we're gonna see the first couple bits of it. And I know there's probably still some people salty that I mentioned that I wasn't too, like, I didn't really feel Witch's death a whole lot. Like, her character, again, to me, I wasn't too attached to. But I do like the effects coming later. I kind of don't agree with Wise in this chapter. Like, there's a part with him and Laguna where, he said he would kill him if any of his friends got killed. And he just kind of lets it up. I don't know if, like, killing Laguna, but I would definitely hold some form of remorse for him. Because if it wasn't for, all this going on, at least from Wise's perspective, we as readers know it from a completely different view, but I feel like Wise kind of gave up on that a little bit too easy. Like, his was a little bit different, because, like, with Laguna, I mean, Laguna's friends, this is what they were fighting for. This is what their whole point of, their whole organization was. So, it's unfortunate, but, like, he already abandoned them at that one point, and he didn't even know what was going on to them for who knows how long, so they could have easily died. Like, he wasn't as, like, he clearly wasn't as close to, like, the people on his side that as say, like, Wise even was to Witch, and, like, knowing what Witch being gone is going to do the Eden Zero crew, whereas, like, the Oasis people, I don't think it's going to do that much to Laguna, other than maybe, like, weigh on him a little bit. But the first part in this chapter, like, seeing all the stuff going on with Ziggy and Elsie, that was really cool. I thought that was one of my favorite parts of this chapter. Not my very favorite part, but I did really like that set of interaction, because with Ziggy's a very strange character. We don't really know too much about him. He's obviously like a big mystery. Part of his whole thing is that, like, the way that he speaks is very cryptic, and the way that he's going about things is without full answers. There's a lot of chunks going on with him that we don't really know about. So seeing a little bit more of that here, but also the interactions with Elsie, is like Elsie's talking to him, and he's saying how he doesn't really need this empire anymore. I think he just needed someone like Nero out of the way who had the Emperor die, who potentially could thwart him, or maybe it's something in there. Maybe it's specific he wanted. I guess I can't even really say it's his ether gear he wanted, because Wormhole, he didn't know about it, did he? I remember that was the whole point of, like, nobody really knew about Nero's ether gear, which is sucks for Nero. It's, maybe if he had worked on his ether gear more, he would have had Overdrive, and he could have powered up and beaten Ziggy. That's his fault. Like, he's like, it's really funny to think about. Like, the only person in the entire Aoi Cosmos that did Overdrive was Shura. Everybody else didn't seem to have it. That's just one of those things. The thing about Overdrive, and I just want to put this out really quick. The thing about Overdrive, actually, right now, that feels really strange, is that it doesn't seem like, it's obviously like a high level technique. Like, it's hard to do, or at least get into that stage. Like, it's not like you can just do it after like 2 weeks. You have to train and get really good with your ether gear. But it's like, it doesn't seem like Bankai. Like, I'll give Bleach for example. Like, Bankai, like, you get Bankai, even if you get Bankai, it takes 10 years to master, but it's like the highest technique for them. That's essentially what Overdrive is to a degree. But the characters, like, I know a lot of the main cast members have, but I mean, not in the way that, like, it's not in the way that's like, oh, the main cast has, like, majority of the Overdrive. No, it's more like, it doesn't seem like it's as impossible to achieve, like, not actually impossible, but as difficult to achieve as certain other kind of, like, other big power-ups. Like, not it's a bad thing, but it's weird that, like, some of these other characters didn't have it. I mean, I get Nero, because Nero focused way more on Empress Dice. I get that entirely. And we just started getting to characters where, like, Overdrive was more relevant, so I don't really blame it too much, but I feel like at least a few of the other Ocean characters should have had Overdrive, or maybe, like, one other character with Overdrive. It's just something I really wanted to bring up in this, because, like, I know the topic of Overdrive has been something that's been going around in Eden Zero, and, like, I don't think the Overdrive stuff was as big of a deal as some people are making out to be, but I can kind of understand where they're coming from, and I do wonder, like, where we're gonna be at after this arc. Maybe after this arc is where, like, characters are gonna have Overdrive way more often. I could see that happening, considering I would assume relatively anybody that's going to be beating the characters with Overdrive are going to also have Overdrive. So we'll see. Because I can't really get mad at the Oceans, because the Oceans were clearly, for the most part, just there for the main cast to get some fights. But the stuff that Ziggy was mentioning about World 31 now, because Shiki made the wrong choice. Shiki didn't do what he was kind of like set to do, or at least what Ziggy wanted. I still really wonder about that. And seeing what Mishima is doing with the whole worlds thing, and like Ziggy talking about Shiki's choices. Like maybe this is the bad timeline and Shiki is constantly just picking things that make things worse or something. Who knows? I really want to know exactly like how Mishima has Ziggy's story plan, but obviously that's one of the bigger mysteries right now that's going on. But he's mentioning how eventually humanity is going to be destroyed, and that the future is going to be that way, and he's going to slaughter the human race. Where Elsie has a chance to kill him, but because she has a debt to him, she decides to let him live here, and Ziggy finds it kind of like hilarious due to the emotions of humans that she's willing to do that because of a debt that he has to her. And she's even asked him at one point if this is the Ziggy that she knows, and it's really weird the way that he's talking about it. He's like saying, if you died, you wouldn't have had all this mental anguish, would you? And I feel like with him, it's more of he's laughing at the emotions, like the human emotion of like, because she lived in space, now she's living, because she survived, she now is grown up with like this worry about what happened with Ziggy and stuff. It's a really weird thing that Mishima's doing there, but again, it's just one of those things that we just don't have any context. Like, I would imagine, it's not the same thing, but like, it's just, Mishima adjacent fairy tale. You could use something like, how confusing the stuff with like the different Jalals was at the time when it was still a big question mark. Just one of those things like way later on we'll have context and you can read some parts and you'll understand it, obviously what they're talking about. But it is cool to see stuff like that where you have no real context, no real idea exactly what he means every time, so it makes it a little strange. But the people, what's going on with Hermit and Sister and everybody on the crew that are really, they're not doing good. Shiki hasn't been eating. I gotta be perfectly honest, because with Shiki didn't have he didn't spend nearly as much time with Witch as I would have preferred. Mishima didn't give Witch nearly as much spotlight, I think, as she should have had at this point to get killed off. And that's one of the things that was like why it didn't hit me as much personally. But I do really like what Mishima did in this chapter with Rebecca, because Rebecca, one of the things, and it kind of goes with what I was talking about with Witch, is Mishima's series each have their own kind of things that they highlight heavily. With Rave Master, it's way more of a structured story. You know about the Dark Brings, Haru finding the Rave Stones and going after to destroy all the Dark Brings from the start. Like, you understand the overall plot from the beginning. It's way more of a structured story. Fairy Tail's way more on the characters. At like the same time, you go to like what's 167 for Rave Master, Fairy Tail, and Eden Zero. There's way more focus on the characters themselves in Fairy Tail, whereas like Eden Zero has been way more focused on kind of like the exploration, the adventure of it. Like, Mishima still does stuff with his characters, but he hasn't nearly enough. Like, as of chapter 167, Rebecca's character doesn't have nearly as much as, say, like, Lucy's, but she's got about as much as, say, like, Ellie's. But in this arc, she really didn't do a ton, which was kind of like, one of the things I was not huge on was, like, the ocean fights weren't too crazy. Like, it was more on characters getting their overdrives. But I can understand that aspect, but Mishima didn't really give much of a battle for Rebecca. Like, it was more of, I feel like more of the stuff with Lyra was to get her cat leaper abilities out of the way, to prevent her from trying to fix things. And here, I think this is like one of Rebecca's best character moments, I think, so far in the series. Because we know how painful it was for her to abuse her cat leaper, and we don't know if, like, the cracking is actually something that is going to affect her. Like, if she does it too much, will her ether shatter, her soul, like, get destroyed by time powers? Or is it just a representative of the amount of pain she's in? Either way, we know how painful it is just from, regardless if it's an actual thing or if it's just a visual thing, the cracking that happens, that she can feel but isn't actually there, as she's overusing her cat leaper ability, as she's using her ability to kind of go back. At least I don't think so. She enters the room looking relatively fine. because like Mishima doesn't show that side as much, but we do see a little bit of it when she enters There's No Crack. So I'm pretty sure that's just the visuals of what she's doing. But I don't think so, because like why would she take off her shirt to do that, to show Shiki? I'm gonna assume it's something that you can for sure visually see. I don't remember. Like that's just something that like it hasn't been deep on my mind, because for me up until now it was more of the limitations of it, whereas like now it's actually being used for character progression and development. And I did like this. I thought this was really good. I actually thought this was, at least to me, I think this is more of a kind of like follow-up level of Wait to Witch's death that to me was more valuable than Witch's actual death. Because with Witch, again, she didn't have a ton of stuff, whereas like Rebecca is the female lead, and Witch is like, she's in the Eden Zero, like the main crew, but she's been like as far in the back as pretty much any of them, whereas Rebecca is the female lead. She's obviously important, and she's going to be around the whole series. So I think something like this, especially after an arc where she didn't get a lot of spotlight, she didn't really get any good fights or any kind of like good scenes. Like her card game thing was fun, but it wasn't like it was definitely one of like the least interesting parts of the arc. It was more than just seeing her be tricky a little bit, whereas like this actually gives a lot of, this is like a big plus to her character stocks, pretty much. Like the value in Rebecca definitely goes up after this chapter, and I do like that, because like again, being perfectly honest, she hasn't had like the level of character content that say like Lucy got, and it's a little different with Ellie, whereas like Ellie wasn't nearly as much of a fighter, so she couldn't compete, she couldn't keep up really in a lot of like the more combat style events. Whereas like Lucy's was gaining that ability as she kind of progressed with her magic. Rebecca's has a little bit of that to a degree as well with her ether gear, but she hasn't really gotten the opportunities in a long time, because she didn't really have much of a match in the Beliogar, and with this, like, she didn't really do anything. I mean, she had the small match with Brittany and Foresta, but it's like those guys were fodder. That was like what, like B Squad 9 or whatever it was. It's just something I really wanted to mention, because I didn't think that again, that people are gonna be mad, but I'll just bring it up one more time. The stuff with Witch, I wasn't too moved by the death itself. It didn't have the build up as say like an Igneol had, but with the aftermath, I figured the aftermath would have some good payout, and it definitely has so far. With Shiki, we know Shiki cries, we know Shiki can kind of like get really down, so like Shiki being sad was what I expected. With what happened with Rebecca was definitely the highlight of the chapter. I do genuinely think that she had the best part in this chapter. I also, just a side note, I really am hoping Mishima decides to keep I mentioned it, either no eye with an eye patch or cover or something, or a cybernetic eye. I just don't want him to heal the eye. It can literally look exactly like his eye, but be a robot eye, and as long as every once in a while they reference it as a robot eye, I'll be hyped. But anyway, other than that, comment below, thumbs up the video, but friend, like button, subscribe button, and check out my other videos. But on that, I appreciate everybody's are, subscribe there. Thank you all for listening. Bye.